So it's finally happened. You're playing the piano and you realize, oh no, I can't play my hands together. And honestly, in that moment, it might seem like the end of the world because you cannot put your hands together. However, putting your hands together is extremely easy if you go about it the right way. So in this video, I'm gonna share with you 5 of my top exercises for putting both hands together when you're playing music. By the way, it's Josh at Piano Frenzy, and if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a video. All right, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into the first exercise. So the first exercise I like to use when I'm trying to put my hands together is simply by playing single note octaves. So what I'll do is I'll put my right hand on middle C and I'll play 4 C's. Simple enough, right? Now, as far as putting your hands together, the left hand will also play C, but it will hold a sustained note the whole time, just like this. You can also do this in the reverse where your right hand holds the sustained note and the left hand plays 4 C's. So we'll move the left hand to middle C and we'll play 4 C's going that way. So at this point in the video, you might want to pause and try that exercise again to make sure you really get it under your fingers. Okay, so there's that one. Let's hop into exercise number 2. For the next exercise, it's pretty simple. It's almost the same thing as the single note octaves, but we're going to use chords instead. So I like to form just basic triads. So I'll do C major chord with the right hand, and then up again, and then one last time. So for the left hand, you're also going to hold a C major chord like so. So now let's put it together. If you want, you can also take this going back down the piano like so. This exercise also works with the left hand being the dominant hand that's moving as well, because sometimes we have to switch which hands we're using when we're playing them together. So we'll start the left hand on middle C, right hand up an octave, just like so. And then back up. The big difference and the most important difference is that you're holding multiple keys now as you're moving up and down the piano versus when we were using single note octaves, we were only just playing one key and one finger. Not too hard, right? And honestly, I would make sure I do that one every single day, probably more than the first exercise. Okay, we're gonna go into exercise number 3. So we all know the sonatina in C major that goes like this. However, if you're having trouble putting your hands together on something like that, one way you can play it is to play one hand with volume and the other hand completely silent. So here's an example of how that can work. So one of the biggest reasons for doing this, or phantom playing those notes in the left hand, is it allows me to channel my ear on my right hand but not stop moving this hand in the process. And it makes sense because sometimes when we hear a bunch of different harmonies and things changing in one hand, it can throw our attention off the other and then they never come together right. What you can do from here is start adding some of the notes back with volume while also phantom playing other parts of it. Here's an example of that. So notice what I did, and I was strategic about this, is I played all the C's in my left hand, but once I went to the G's and then the descending scale, I dropped my volume. And you can be strategic in your music as well. If you find that parts are repeating a lot, maybe those are the parts you want to give volume to, and then the parts where it's getting a little more difficult, perhaps that's where you start phantom playing until you get that really well on your fingers and then add the volume back. So one method you can use right now is the chords that we used earlier. You can simply play your moving chords silently, but keep your left hand sustained. So here's how that goes. Then when you're comfortable, add all the volume back. So if you want to try this with something else like pentascales, this works actually really well. So I'll keep volume in the left hand, but I'll play the pentascales silently in the right hand. And then when that's comfortable, then I'll add volume. So again, if you're going to use this method, do it with short passages of music. That way it's easily digestible and you'll know exactly what areas you need to work on and which areas are fine. So once you get a little bit more advanced, then I would go to exercise number 4, but I'll show it to you first so you know what I mean. One of the biggest areas of music I see people struggling with is actually playing scales together, for example, like this. So one way to get your hands together playing scales is instead of playing them in parallel motion where they go together, we play them in contrary motion. Contrary motion has great benefits, mostly because the fingering between both hands remains the same. It makes it a little easier to put your hands together. Here's an example. I'll put both thumbs on C, and as I play my scale, notice my fingering and my changes all happen at the same time. Change, and then we're back to the C. It works on other scales too, G major as well. Over. Now, this works for most contrary motion scales. There are some where the fingering is not exactly the same. For example, B major. However, generally speaking, the changes happen really close together and at the same time in some situations. And it just depends which scale you're playing, which mode you're playing it in. And I just think contrary motion is a great way to at least get your hands touching the scales together. Once you're comfortable with that, then you can go for your parallel scales, you know, and feel comfortable with it. So another exercise that's unique that doesn't involve actually playing the keys is just a coordination exercise. So what you can do is close the piano like so, and we'll tap quarter notes in this hand, and we'll tap just whole notes in this hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, tap, 2, 3, 4. And if we want to make it a little more interesting, maybe we'll do half notes in this hand this time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And of course you can make everything doing the same thing. 1, make them all quarters, right? 4, 1, 2. Where this gets really helpful is when you start doing complex rhythms like adding eighth notes. So maybe I'll do 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now the chord notes are over here, right? But I'm doing the syncopation over here. So once you're comfortable here doing it on the flat surface, we can just open the piano up and just pick some keys to try this on. So how about we choose G and we'll just do this. 1, 2. Now half notes. Now quarter notes. Eighth notes. We can also take this back to chords as well and try this out, because a lot of music where I see people struggling to put the hands together is not chords that are held, but chords that are also moving at different rhythms. So here's an example. We'll just go to G major as well. Half note. Quarters. Eighth notes. Now what we can also do is combine it with the earlier exercise where we were moving up the piano, right? So here's an example of that. Eighth notes. So again, this can get as advanced as you need it. I would keep it simple. Pick some keys you're comfortable playing in, and then when you're comfortable, look at your own music and find areas where you can create these rhythm exercises out of small passages. That's where it's most effective, rather than just playing basic positions that don't relate to the piece you're playing at the time. And finally, we're here, the fifth exercise, and probably the most important. So make sure you don't skip this one. Let's hop into it. So another exercise I like to try is what I call the wiggle. It's really important because I see a lack of flexibility in a lot of piano students' fingers, and that usually will cause them to have issues putting the hands together. So the wiggle is actually simple in concept. You just take finger 5 and 1, and you wiggle it like this, and your other hand will do the same thing. So you can wiggle with the same fingers at the same time, although your notes will be a little different. So here's what I mean. Let's go to C here, and then I'll go to C here, and you're just simply gonna do this. Both pinkies, both thumbs. Now to make the exercise a little more engaging, we're gonna move up the piano by seconds, doing the same wiggle like this. And up, up. So there are traces of both contrary and parallel motion here, right? The parallel motion is in the hands in which directions they're moving. The contrary is in the finger selection, and that the fingers are the same. Now the wiggle is not just set just for fingers 5 and 1, you can do the wiggle with any fingers you want. For example, you can do 4 and 1, then 3 and 1, then 2 and 1. And the reason I like that is because it gets you playing different intervallic distances, right? You can play fifths, fourths, thirds, and seconds by doing that. Here's an example. So the right hand, I'm just gonna do fifths, then fourths, then thirds, then seconds. Now I can open it back up, starting with the seconds, then thirds, then fourths, and then now comes the challenge of putting them together. So let's try fifths first, then fourths, then thirds, then seconds, thirds, fourths, and fifths. So based on some of the other concepts we talked about, you can start adding chords into this hand while this one is doing the wiggle, or vice versa. Here's an example of that. Or we can move up the piano just doing fifths. Now if we want our harmonies to change together, the left hand will also have to move up by seconds, and that's where real coordination is important. So here's an example of that. And then of course we're going to reverse the fingering on the way down. So I hope you found this video super helpful, super encouraging. I hope that you have some great skills now to put your hands together. And in fact, it's very easy to do if you go about it the right way. So if you enjoyed the content, make sure to give a thumbs up so I know you're enjoying it. And of course, leave a comment so I know what you think, and let me know if these exercises are helping you out. Until next time, I'll see you.